My name is Valerie. I'm 31 years old, and I want to tell you about the day I sat across a closing table, signed my name on a stack of documents, and became the legal owner of the house I grew up in. The same house where, 8 years earlier, my parents sat me down and told me the $47,000 they had promised me for college was gone. Every penny of it. Not lost, not stolen by some stranger. Spent. On flowers and a venue and a 5-tier cake and a destination honeymoon for my sister's wedding that I was a bridesmaid in, wearing a dress I also paid for myself. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something. I don't tell this story with bitterness. I tell it because I know there are people watching this right now who have been told, in one way or another, that their dreams are less important than someone else's celebration. And I want you to know that is not the end of your story. If this is resonating with you already, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in a mid-sized city in the Midwest, the second of 2 daughters. My sister, Renata, is 4 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to notice, I understood that the rules were different for her. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone outside our family would have spotted immediately, but in the way that adds up over years into something that changes the shape of a person. When Renata wanted to quit piano lessons after 3 years, my mother said, "Of course, sweetheart, if it doesn't make you happy." When I wanted to quit 2 years later, my father said, "You made a commitment. You finish what you start." I finished. Renata took up horseback riding instead, which my parents drove her to every Saturday morning without complaint. My after-school activities had to be reachable by city bus. I want to pause here for a second, because I know how this sounds. I know some of you are thinking, those are small things. And you're right. Each one was small. But have you ever felt the weight of 100 small things? Have you ever tried to explain to someone why you're exhausted from carrying something you can't even point to? My parents weren't cruel people. They were just certain, in the quiet way some parents are, that one child needed more. And it wasn't me. By the time I was in high school, I had internalized the arithmetic of our household without anyone ever teaching it to me. I got a job at 16. I paid for my own school supplies, my own clothes, my own everything that wasn't strictly required for survival. I didn't do this because anyone asked me to. I did it because I had watched long enough to know that asking would be complicated, and that complicated always seemed to cost me something. The college fund was different, though. That was something my father had announced at dinner when I was 12, looking directly at me. "I've opened an account for each of you," he said. "When you're 18, it'll be yours for school." He was proud when he said it. I held on to those words for 6 years. My sister went to school, graduated, got a job in marketing, and at 26 announced her engagement to a man named Derek, who was perfectly nice and entirely forgettable, which is the kindest thing I can say about him. The wedding planning started immediately, and I watched from my college apartment, where I was finishing my junior year on a combination of grants, a partial scholarship, and loans. As my parents seemed to expand around the project of Renata's wedding, the way plants expand toward light. They were joyful in a way I hadn't seen in years. I told myself it was fine. I had my loans. I had 2 semesters left. I had a plan. Then my mother called. It was a Tuesday in February, early evening. I remember I was eating cereal for dinner because I'd miscalculated my grocery budget for the week. She said, "We need to tell you something about the college account." And even before the next words came, I felt it. That particular gravity, that pull in the chest that the body knows before the mind does. "We had to use it," she said, "for the wedding. Things got expensive very quickly, and we didn't want Renata to start her marriage with debt." Type yes in the comments if you've ever felt the floor disappear beneath you while standing completely still. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I said, "That was my money." And my mother said, and I want you to hear this exactly as she said it, "It was meant for you." But family helps family, Valerie. You understand. I didn't understand, but I said that I did because I was 20 years old, eating cereal in a cold apartment, and I didn't yet know how to stand inside my own hurt without apologizing for it. I finished that semester on fumes. I applied for every additional loan I qualified for. I worked 26 hours a week at a coffee shop while carrying a full course load in business administration. I graduated, on time, without ceremony, because the tickets cost money I didn't have and my parents were still paying off wedding debt. No one from my family came. Thoughtful. Here's what I want you to understand about the years that followed. They were not cinematic. There was no dramatic montage, no single turning point set to swelling music. There was just work, quiet, relentless, unglamorous work, and the particular kind of determination that grows in people who have learned, very early, that no one is coming to save them. I graduated with $38,000 in student loans, a business degree, and a job offer from a property management company that paid $34,000 a year. It was not impressive, but it was mine, entirely, in a way nothing had ever been before. Short pause. I want to pause here for a second, because I think about that girl sometimes, 22 years old, one suitcase, a laptop with a cracked screen, starting from less than zero. And I want to tell her what I now know, that the very thing that was supposed to hold you back was actually teaching you something no classroom could. I learned property. I learned it the way you only learn things when your survival depends on understanding them. I learned how buildings were valued, how cash flow worked, how tenants and leases and maintenance costs braided together into something that either made money or didn't. I learned what made a neighborhood turn, what made rents rise, what a smart renovation could do to an appraisal. After 2 years, I moved to a larger firm. After 2 more, I got my real estate license. I was 26 and I had saved, with almost painful discipline, $22,000. Thoughtful. Have you ever made a decision that felt insane and inevitable at the same time? I used that $22,000 as a down payment on a small duplex in a transitional neighborhood, a 2-unit building where I lived in one unit and rented the other. My mortgage payment was $1,100. My tenant paid $950. I was effectively paying $150 a month to own property. I didn't tell my family, not because I was hiding it, but because I had learned over many years that sharing good news with people who had not invested in your dream was a particular kind of exposure I couldn't afford. Not yet. My relationship with my family during those years was what I would call cordial distance. I called on birthdays and holidays. I attended Renata's baby shower and her son's first birthday. I sat at Christmas dinners and answered questions about my life in broad strokes, leaving the specific numbers and the specific plans entirely to myself. My mother would sometimes say, in the voice she used for observations, she wanted to sound casual, thoughtful. "You seem guarded, Valerie." And I would smile and say, "I'm just focused right now." which was true. Short pause. But here's what they didn't know, what no one at those holiday tables knew. By year 4 of this quiet building, I owned 3 properties. By year 6, 5. The cash flow wasn't extraordinary. We're talking $3,000 to $4,000 a month in net income. But I was also earning a salary and I was compounding. Every dollar of profit went back into the next acquisition. I was living like I was still that girl with the cracked laptop, not because I had to, but because I understood in my bones that the foundation I was building would only hold if I built it correctly. And then I got a phone call that changed everything. It wasn't dramatic. It was my mother. A year and a half before the closing I mentioned at the start of this story, calling to tell me that my father had lost his job. The company he'd worked at for 19 years had been restructured, and at 61 he found himself with a severance package and a mortgage he could not sustain alone on my mother's part-time income. Sad. "We might have to sell the house," she said. Long pause. There was a long pause on both sides of the phone. Before I continue, I want you to understand something crucial about what happened next, because I think it's the part that people get wrong when they hear stories like this. This is not a revenge story. I did not hear that my parents were in trouble and feel satisfaction. I felt something much more complicated and much more human than that. I felt sad. I felt the specific sorrow of a child who spent years wanting to matter to her parents. And I felt the door of an old wound open just slightly. But I also felt clear. For the first time, perhaps, I felt completely clear. I hired a real estate attorney. Not to be clever, not to make a point, but because when a property goes to market or to foreclosure, clarity is the only thing that protects anyone. I asked her to pull the listing when it went live. The house hit the market on a Thursday in October. I know because I had set an alert. It was listed at $310,000, fair market value for the neighborhood, maybe slightly below, because my parents' agent had suggested pricing for a quick sale. The photos were good. The house was well maintained. My father had always taken care of it, which was one of his qualities I had genuinely admired. I looked at those photos for a long time that night. The kitchen where I had made my own breakfast every morning before school starting at age 9, because my parents slept in on weekdays. The backyard where I had done homework on a blanket in the summers, because the house only had one desk, and it was in Renata's room. The driveway where I had stood 22 years ago with one suitcase, waiting for a cab to take me to a bus station because no one had offered me a ride. I called my attorney in the morning and told her I wanted to make an offer. Here is where I need to be precise, because the money matters to this story. By this point, I had 7 properties. My net worth, in equity, in cash, in a modest investment account I'd started at 25, was just over $1.1 million. I was not wealthy by any dramatic standard, but I was solvent in a way that my family had never seen and did not know about. I offered $325,000, $15,000 over asking. Clean offer, no contingencies, 30-day close. I want to pause here for a second. Type in the comments if you've ever kept a secret not out of deception, but out of self-protection, because that is exactly what the previous 8 years had been. The offer was accepted within 24 hours. I did not tell my parents who the buyer was. My attorney handled all communication. Her name appeared on every document. Mine did not, until the closing. The closing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November at a title company across town. My parents had agreed to vacate by December 1st and were, according to my attorney, who had spoken with their agent, relieved that the sale had happened quickly and cleanly, with what appeared to be an investor buyer. They assumed, I later learned, that they would never interact with the buyer directly. I arrived early. I wore a navy blazer and dark pants. My hair was pulled back. I had not slept particularly well the night before, not out of anxiety, but out of the particular kind of alertness that comes before something you've been building toward for years without knowing it. My parents arrived and walked into the conference room. My mother saw me first. She stopped walking, completely. My father almost walked into her. "Valerie?" she said. The way she said it, it wasn't one word, it was a whole paragraph. Confusion, recognition, something reaching for an explanation that hadn't arrived yet. "Hi, Mom." I stood up. "Hi, Dad." My father looked at the table. He looked at the documents. He looked at me. And I watched the understanding move across his face the way weather moves across an open field, slowly at first, then all at once. "You're the buyer," he said. "I am." The title agent, to her immense credit, said nothing. She simply laid the documents in front of each party and uncapped her pen. Can you imagine that room? Can you imagine the specific silence of it? My mother sat down. She looked like she was trying to locate something to say among a large number of feelings. My father sat down too, more slowly, and he looked at his hands. I sat across from them. And I want to be honest with you. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind many times over the years, not as revenge, but as a kind of protection. I had imagined anger. I had imagined tears, mine, theirs. I had imagined a speech. What I actually said was very quiet and very simple. "I have rented this house back to you," I said, "at below market rate for as long as you need it. There's a lease in the packet. My attorney reviewed it. It's fair." "This isn't about the money, Mom. It was never about the money." She put her hand over her mouth. My father said, "Valerie," and then didn't finish. We signed the documents. In the weeks after the closing, I gave my parents space to feel whatever they needed to feel. I didn't call every day. I didn't need the acknowledgement immediately. I had learned, through years of therapy I had quietly paid for myself, starting at 24, that closure is something you build internally, not something another person grants you. But things did shift. Slowly, the way seasons shift, where you can't identify the single day it changed, but one morning you notice the light is different. My mother called me about 2 weeks after they moved back in under the new lease. She called in the morning, which she almost never did. She said, "Can we have lunch?" We met at a diner near the house. She was already there when I arrived, and she looked smaller somehow, though she is not a small woman. She had her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and she didn't look up immediately when I sat down. Then she did look up, and she said, "I need to tell you that I'm sorry, and I need you to know that I understand if that doesn't fix anything." I want to pause here, because I have thought about this moment more than almost any other in this story. Because an apology from a parent, a real one, not a justification dressed up as an apology, is a particular and rare thing. And I had spent years not expecting it. I had built my entire life on the assumption that it would never come. So when it did, I cried. Not pretty crying, real crying, the kind that embarrasses you in public. And my mother reached across the table and held my hand, and she cried too. She told me she had known, on some level, for a long time that the scales in our family had not been even. She said she had told herself I was stronger and more independent as a way of making the imbalance feel acceptable. She said hearing those words out loud, from herself, was uncomfortable in a way that had been building for years. Have you ever had someone name the thing you've been carrying and felt it get both heavier and lighter at the same time? I told her something I had worked very hard to be able to say. I don't need an explanation. I just needed you to know that I saw it. We ordered food. We ate. We talked about smaller things. Her garden, my niece who had recently started walking. It was not a perfectly healed relationship. It was the beginning of a different one. My father took longer. Men like my father, proud, fixed in their patterns, don't often sit easily inside an apology. But about 6 weeks after that lunch, he came to see one of my properties. He asked to. He had heard I was renovating one of the units, and he wanted to see it. He walked through the space slowly. He looked at everything. The new flooring, the kitchen I had designed on a budget that somehow looked expensive, the way the light came through the east-facing windows in the afternoon. He said, and he was looking at the window when he said it, not at me, "You built something real." That was all, but I understood what it held. I'm not here to tell you that everything was fixed. Families are complicated, and the weight of a childhood doesn't simply dissolve because of a graceful moment over a closing table. Renata and I are still figuring out how to be sisters in a way that is honest. My relationship with my parents is warm in some ways and still careful in others. But here is what I want to leave you with, because this is the part that matters most to me. When I was 20 years old, eating cereal for dinner in a cold apartment, the $47,000 that had been promised to me was gone. And in the grief of that, and it was grief, even if no one would have called it that, I made a choice. Not a dramatic choice, not a defiant speech or a sworn declaration, just a quiet, daily choice to build something that was entirely, unambiguously mine. No one funded it. No one co-signed it. No one believed in it loudly enough for me to hear. And that turns out to have been the making of me. If you have ever been told by a parent, a sibling, a partner, anyone, that your dream is less important than someone else's moment, I want you to hear this. That is information about them, not a verdict on you. Your job is not to prove them wrong loudly. Your job is to build quietly, with integrity, and let the work speak when it's ready. It will be ready. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your own story in the comments below. I read them. I really do.